So we have had the what about technology, we have now talked about what about the politics, and now we are going to talk about that other, I think, very sort of sensational topic also, what about population? If you follow de Waal, Alex de Waal, I just talked about, in his book about starvation, he says, also over time, the amount of deaths as a result of starvation go down, right? In the previous century, we had Mao, we had Stalin, we had Hitler. They created famines, by and large sustained famines, where 30 million people may have died, or 5 million people, or the Ukrainian famine, which may have cost the lives of 6 million people, immense amounts. That we don't see anymore, so they go down. What we also see is that the population rises, and now something incredibly interesting happens, and that is that there is a linkage between, or an assumption, that more people cause a threat to our world hunger situation. Basically, literally saying we have more people, so more people will go hungry if we don't do something. I want to say something about that, because that is actually also partly erroneous. So we have seen, if we go here back to 1760, and basically here at the end of the 1880s or so, we see the invention of the combustion engine, right? Petrol and stuff comes into being, we go and industrialize, and all of a sudden we see that the world population goes up. Basically, the result is we have more wealth, we have more food, people can reproduce faster and faster, and over time it goes down, right? We are now here in 2015. So we are part of a population, a demographic explosion. We're in the middle of it. It's not ended yet. Maybe, but that's a matter of speculation. You see it slows down, right? So basically we're going there in this prediction. But it means that in 2 centuries the world population rose from 1 to 7 billion. That's immense. That's an immense growth. Never know what the word is, actually. What this says is economic development moderates population growth. So first we have economic development. It enlarges population growth, but then over time it starts to moderate it, right? People start buying stuff, they go to school, we have this simple equation. The more people are educated, the more they have to study, the more they build careers, and the fewer children they get, and so on and so forth. That's all quite simple. So here it says, there where this economic development did not take place, we see that that population growth does not slow down, or slows down less quickly. The effect of this, actually, if we extrapolate this, is that in 2050 we expect to rise to 10 billion mouths to be fed, and in 2100 we expect to rise to 11 billion, right? Now, some more graphs. I want to bring this back again to sub-Saharan Africa, because here we see the same. I started with this first graph. If we look at that visualization of the world hunger map, we see sub-Saharan Africa standing out. But that was now, right? But what if we look at this future prediction? 2015, we see a little over 1 billion people in Africa. In 2100, we see more than 4 billion people in Africa. So that is quadrupling, right? And already it's the main world hunger belt. It's the place where most, food insecurity takes place. You see, in Asia, there is, still quite a lot of people. There is some growth, but it slows down. And in here it is stable, or actually in Europe, it's decreasing. This is the graph, right? So what is particularly interesting, and what scientists, some of the UN is particularly worried about, is how in that area where the Green Revolution failed, in that area where most chronic and recurring conflicts take place that prevent particular technological fixes or particular infrastructural changes to take hold, how to imagine adding this to the equation. More people in the least food insecure part of the world. And that link between population and food has a little history, and that's what I want to say something about. That is Thomas Malthus. Who knows Thomas Malthus? brilliant. That's not so many people. He was a scientist from the 16th century, 17th century, and he showed, or he argued, wrote a book about that famine is a positive check on population size. So he basically says, if the population grows, then at a certain point the land will not be able to feed this population. So there will be an inevitable catastrophe, people will die off, and a new balance will emerge. We know that as a Malthusian catastrophe. And over time, we have seen that this reasoning, like the threat of population rise, the suggestion that more people means that a catastrophe is looming and that people will die because nature or agriculture or societies cannot cope with that, is something that we have seen. Up to the 1960s, there were very serious biologists and agriculturalists that predicted a great die-off. They say more than 4 billion people will die in the 1960s or the 1970s because we cannot sustain it. It never happened. We see Niger and Ethiopia already in the past, let's say 50 years, a huge population expanse in that sub-Saharan African continent, but there is not famine as a positive check. The famines that have been there were maybe catastrophic regionally for the people involved, but not in the terms of restoring a balance in a natural sense. So this link is interesting, and we see it everywhere. We see when the UN starts to advocate SDG 2, when development actors start to legitimize their interventions, they say the population is growing, we need to intervene otherwise. This Sir David Attenborough does the same, right? Attempting to solve famine in Africa by simply sending flour bags is barmy. Sir David Attenborough has said, as he argued, it was nature's response to too many people and not enough land. Now, why this is interesting to say something about, first of all, because it's academically problematic. It is provenly false. Secondly, it's an assumption that seems logical, but which is not necessarily that logical. Secondly, we have seen over in the past that certain political policies may follow on this, right? So for instance, non-intervention may follow this because leaders may say, or experts may say, you know what, actually what we need is a restoration of balance. If we allow the great die-off to emerge, if we allow the Malthusian catastrophe, we will have a clean slate. So actually ideas may in the end be dangerous, may be harmful. And that's why this is so surprising. I want to go back a little bit to De Waal. Oh, at first I want to say this. It says population growth in Niger and Ethiopia proves the marginal role as famine as this positive check. But there's something else that is quite interesting. If you look, for instance, at the case of Niger, I think I referred to it earlier, that although all these developments take place, that immense population growth makes that a country like that is almost running to stand still, is how some people talk about it. So they have to, it's not there's no development there per se, or that there's no agricultural change per se. It is that it is in a context of large population growth. Still, it does not become something like this. There's no great die-off in Niger per se. Right, anyway, so Thomas Malthus, he's a key figure in studies on famine, in studies on food crisis and hunger. This is a graph of De Waal again, and here we see famine mortality, and here we see population rise. So this starts in 1870, which is basically the first moment we start counting. Before that we have legacies and histories of famines and crises, but we don't know. Still, you know, counting famines is still quite complex, very difficult. If you look at, for instance, the assumed death toll of the Great Leap Forward famine in China is between 15 and 30 million. So there's a huge amount of you know, let's say, knowledgeability there. But this graph is telling, and De Waal uses it to talk about what he terms Malthus' zombie. And the zombie, as a zombie concept, is something that is dead but does not die. Right? Zombies are dead, but they don't die. They're still here, but undead in a way. So he says, and backs that up with considerable data, say every now and then we see the suggestion that population rise will lead to famine but there is no academic backup. And here we have it, right? So famine mortality goes down. Here it's 1981, 1990. We see here, you know, coinciding with the last days of the big dictators, the effects of the grain revolution, maybe some other aspects that take huge growth in emergency intervention and so on, the whole package of global responses to development problems. And since then, that figure is actually quite low, but the population still rises very high. Here, all these famines are famines that correlated with war, Second World War, the Chinese Great Leap Forward, particular episodes in Ethiopia where we saw a government kicking back on its people. And before that, they would argue we had a problem with nature. But in the modern times, right, since we started to know more about disease, since we started to know more about agriculture, since we started to know more about political distribution, and so on and so forth, that correlation is problematic. And the zombie concept is interesting because he says, we know it's problematic, but still we think it will happen. Still it comes back as something that we cannot sort of get rid of. I think I have to leave it there because my time is up. I just wanted to show you that thought, and I hope that if you read up in the newspaper and you see that that link is being made uncritically, then think about this graph. And you should all read the book also.